So Paris is all decked up, but around 500 kilometers away in Strasbourg, the sentiment is different. It's not warm or welcoming, it's cold and insulting. This city is home to the European Parliament. It's in session right now. And on Wednesday, they discussed Manipur. Now don't worry, we're as confused as you are. The violence in Manipur has nothing to do with Europe or any of these countries, in fact. India says it's an internal matter, but European lawmakers do not care. They decided that Manipur requires their urgent attention. Around 6 parliamentary groups called for a debate and resolution. Yesterday, their wish was granted. The whole thing lasted around 20 minutes. That's it. 20 minutes to unpack a decades-old conflict. But then again, these MPs were not concerned about nuance. Their focus was to defame and insult India. We listened to the whole thing and we identified 3 themes. 3 themes of what was discussed at the European Parliament. The first is to use Manipur as the symptom of a bigger problem. And what's that? The same old backsliding democracy argument. Listen to this.
We should all be worried about the worsening human rights situation in India. Freedom of press has narrowed, journalists and activists have been arrested for false reasons, discrimination and hate have increased. And this is also what I saw personally when I visited India in December.
Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident across India. Those who are not Hindu, in particular Christians, are facing growing intolerance, violence, humiliation, discrimination. We're seeing this in anti-conversion laws in different federal states.
So it's not just Manipur, it's the whole of India, according to them. The second theme is to present this as some sort of a religious war, sort of like an anti-crusade. Each speaker talked about Christians being under attack in India, about churches being vandalized. For many of them, that is the red line. Take a look at this.
India is an important partner to the European Union, but if we as a Christian community can respect other faiths and identities, we must ask our partners to do the same.
Persecutions of Christians are real, and it is our duty to make sure that they stop, also in Manipur.
Tells you how shallow their understanding of the subject is. The violence in Manipur involves 2 communities, the Meiteis and the Kukis. The Meiteis are predominantly Hindus, the Kukis are mostly Christians. But religion is not the biggest fault line here. Their conflict goes back decades to other issues, like land ownership, like reservation in jobs and colleges. Clearly, the European MPs are not aware of this, and how would they be? Even Indian citizens, a lot of them, have a hard time understanding this. So what chance do white men sitting 7,000 kilometers away have? But that is not stopping them. These MPs are cut from a different cloth, it seems. Their confidence does not come from knowledge, it comes from entitlement. So this is what they said. Anyway, on to the third theme, to discredit India's Prime Minister and government. And there's a clear pattern here. Before the US visit, we heard a lot of chatter about human rights. A State Department report questioned India's religious freedoms. It recommended blacklisting India. And now Europe is doing the very same thing. The Prime Minister landed on the 13th of July. The Manipur debate happened on the 12th. This is too close to be a coincidence. Some of the MPs went directly after India's top leadership, sort of like a name and shame.
Since he entered power in 2014, Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has been implementing a radical nationalist Hindu policy, which has had terrible consequences. Journalists, religious minorities, and human rights fighters. He always says that he is an heir to Mahatma Gandhi. We all admire. He takes meditation time. He created a World Yoga Day. He seems kind and well-meaning. But in India, millions of Muslims and Christians suffer every single day because the government violates their most fundamental rights.
There's criticism, and then there is whatever that was. And this is happening way too often to call it a coincidence. You lay out the red carpet on one side, you host a state dinner with all the pomp and show, but at the same time, your parliament hurls insults. You accuse your guests of persecuting people at home. How is this acceptable? India has firmly rejected this so-called debate. The Foreign Secretary reiterated that Manipur is an internal matter for India.
On the Manipur question, Suhasini, this is a matter totally internal to India. We are aware of what the Brussels in the Parliament happening, and we have made a reach out to the concerned EU parliamentarians, but we have made it very clear to them this is a matter totally and absolutely internal to India.
It's a simple concept. But the West is like those nosy neighbors. They simply cannot mind their own business. Now, can you imagine if the situation was reversed? If the Indian Parliament discussed the riots in France or the collapse of the Dutch government, it would be beyond absurd. But if you think about it, there is a lot to discuss. Europe has major human rights issues. For example, Islamophobia is on the rise. Just last month, the Quran was publicly burnt in Sweden, a copy of the Quran. Their Prime Minister called it freedom of expression. Another issue is the anti-immigration rhetoric. France itself was torn apart by the crisis earlier this month. So the fact is, Europe has a full plate. Their so-called union is pulling apart. But what do they want to discuss? Manipur in India. These European MPs want tough action against India. They say keep human rights in mind while discussing trade deals. Unfortunately for them, the European Union may not listen. Western governments have largely been positive towards India. It's only these entitled pockets that speak against it. But how do they get these platforms to preach? And it's easy to dismiss all of this as freedom of speech, but look at the larger template. It's always against India, it's always before a major visit, and it's always the same issues. It's less about speech and more about conspiring. Speaking of which, India's national capital is witnessing some near-apocalyptic scenes. Delhi is flooded. The Yamuna River is 3 meters above the danger mark. It threatens to submerge the city and it continues to swell. Several areas of Delhi are inundated. The water is chest high in some places. Hundreds are being evacuated from near the Yamuna's bank. Some have seen their homes ruined and their belongings swept away. The question is, why is this happening? Here's a report.
This drowning city isn't some battered backwater town. It's India's national capital, New Delhi, the capital of the most populous country in the world, the capital of a rising global power. But a torrent of unseasonal rainfall has brought it crashing down. Last weekend, it saw record-breaking rainfall. We told you about that. But that has calmed down in recent days. Despite this, Delhi is on the brink of catastrophe because of the rising waters of the Yamuna River. Now, on most days, calling the Yamuna a river may seem generous. Its absurd pollution levels leave it looking less like a river and more like a sewage canal. But this week, the Yamuna has reminded Delhi residents that it indeed is a river, and it can embody all the fury of one. As we speak, the river is breaching all danger thresholds. Its water level is at an all-time high, 3 meters above the danger mark. The Yamuna crossed the danger level days ago. Its waters have been flowing into Delhi, submerging multiple areas in the city. There's now a scramble to evacuate people living along its banks. These are mostly poor people who live in makeshift houses. They've been facing the brunt of the river's fury for days now.
I lost my house, the crops, and now I do not have a place to live. I do not have food to eat.
The water gushed inside our house at such ferocious speed that we started crying. We somehow survived the night by sitting atop a wooden bed, but the water also damaged it. So we were forced to swim out of our houses.
Many of these vulnerable people moved to the about 2,500 relief camps set up across the city. There they have faced a lack of basic amenities like water and sanitation.
We are facing an acute water shortage here. No, we did not get any help from the government.
That isn't a ringing endorsement of Delhi's preparedness. And the problems aren't restricted to the people in relief camps. Delhi will face a 25% shortfall in drinking water in the coming days. That's because 3 water treatment plants have been shut down due to the flooding. But it seems like the government is slowly waking up.
Relief camps mein
there's been great difficulty regarding toilets and bathrooms in the relief camps.
due to some pilgrims also coming to the camps. So now some of these camps are being shifted to schools.
They can shift people into schools because schools and universities in the capital have been shut till the end of the week. Employees at non-essential government offices are working from home. An advisory has been sent to private sector offices to implement work from home as well. But all these are reactionary measures. They don't address the main cause of the river overflowing. Part of it is, of course, natural. Heavy rains have lashed India's northern states. It's far beyond the annual average rainfall levels. All this surplus water needs to go somewhere, so naturally it will flow downstream along rivers. What's worse for Delhi are the compulsions of the states upstream. The major problem is taking place at a barrage in the state of Haryana. It is full due to the excess rainfall. Haryana has no choice but to discharge the water, and that discharge is what's leading to the Yamuna overflowing in New Delhi. But again, it's very easy to blame circumstances beyond one's control, to blame all this on an act of God or call it a natural calamity. The real question is, what have authorities been doing to prepare for crises like this? Flooding is not a new phenomenon in New Delhi. Even in years with normal rainfall, India's capital gets inundated. The Yamuna has overflowed in the past as well.
Every year, water enters our homes. Last year, the furniture got ruined. We tried to save it, but water kept increasing. For 2 days, the bank has been inundated. A lot of furniture has been destroyed. It has become an annual event. After the flood is over, only garbage remains. Garbage brings diseases in the form of mosquitoes, pests and snakes inside our homes.
Floods, garbage and disease. It's a shambolic look for the capital of one of the world's largest economies.
There's a new hot topic online, the internet apocalypse. It's exactly what it sounds like. There are warnings of a global disruption by 2025. Your network connections could snap. Your websites could crash. Your social media platforms could go offline. I know it sounds pretty serious. So where is this prediction coming from? A paper written by a computer science professor at the University of California. And why does it predict an internet apocalypse? Because of the sun. It's beautiful on a bright morning, but the sun has a temper too. Sometimes it releases huge bursts of energy. This takes the form of solar flares and electromagnetic fields. And where do they end up? Across the solar system, including here on Earth. In 2025, they're predicting a big solar storm. Bigger the storm, bigger the disturbance. So the fear is our internet cables could be affected. Now that would be deadly. Around 99% of international communication is done via fiber optic cables. Most of them are undersea cables. If they snap, the world would lose the internet. The obvious question is, has this happened before? Well, not on this scale. In 1859, there was a big solar storm. It fried telegraph lines and electrocuted engineers. In 1989, there was another one. It took out a Canadian power grid for hours. In 2011, China was hit by a solar storm. Their radio network in the south was disrupted. So to answer my question, yes, it has happened before. Then what's different this time? Possibly the scale. By 2025, the sun is expected to reach what is called the solar maximum. It's a period of high activity, which means the solar storm could become more powerful. Could it knock out the internet? Now that's hard to say. We haven't tested for such extreme situations, so our infrastructure may or may not hold up. If it doesn't, there could be chaos because the internet is not just a hobby anymore. Millions of jobs depend on it. So who is making sure this apocalypse does not happen? There's no word from NASA or any of the space agencies. There are some fake warnings online, but nothing official. Maybe the scientists are confident things are under control. After all, they've dealt with such warnings before. You may remember, some of you may remember, the Y2K problem. Experts thought computers would collapse in the year 2000. The reason was a bit complicated. Most digital programs use the last 2 digits to identify years. So 1942 was just 42. But the year 2000 presented a problem. The last 2 digits were 00. Would the computer read that as 2000 or 1900? This confusion consumed computer experts in that period. Some said it would take $600 billion to fix. But in the end, nothing happened. A couple of minor errors, but nothing major. Could this apocalypse warning be similar? Now, if you watch a lot of Hollywood, you may have your doubts. Solar storms have featured in multiple films, like Knowing, which stars Nicolas Cage, and Solar Flares, which was released in the year 2008. If you've seen these films, you must already be spooked. Unfortunately, Nicolas Cage cannot help us this time, only scientists can. If you think about it, this story is a reflection of our times too. We're discussing a possibility, something that may or may not happen, something whose impact is unknown. Tells you how important the internet has become. Around 5 billion people around the world use it. It makes up around 10% of the global GDP and probably supports the remaining 90%. So life without the internet is not easy to contemplate. And that's exactly why governments and scientists should be thinking about it. Solar storm or not, an internet apocalypse cannot be left to chance. So Biden's cabinet minister was hacked, but don't ask him which one, because chances are he'll get them mixed up. Before you say that's a low blow, let me give you some updates. Joe Biden was in Lithuania yesterday for the NATO summit. He was attending the NATO annual summit. After the talks, he addressed the media along with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Now, Zelensky's first name is Volodymyr. It's a very popular first name in Ukraine. But Joe Biden got it mixed up. Listen to this.
Vladimir and I, shouldn't be so familiar. Mr. Zelensky and I...
Another day, another gaffe. I know this sounds like a harmless one. Volodymyr and Vladimir sound quite similar, so maybe he got confused. But this particular first name is very symbolic in Ukraine. One of their national heroes is Volodymyr, Volodymyr the Great. He was a king who ruled Kiev for almost 40 years. He is credited with a lot of development. But the same king is pretty famous in Russia too. There he's called Vladimir the Great. So both first names are actually the same. Volodymyr is the Ukrainian version, Vladimir is the Russian one. That's one reason why Biden's gaffe is problematic. The other reason is this Vladimir, the Russian president, who ordered the invasion. Imagine if someone mixed up your name with your biggest enemy, gaffe or not, you would be hurt. But such mistakes have followed Joe Biden in recent months. He took a tumble at the US Air Force Academy. He confused Ukraine and Iraq. He also confused India and China. If your aging uncle did that at the dinner table, you wouldn't mind. But if that uncle had America's nuclear codes, you would. Biden's critics have jumped at these incidents. They say he's unfit for office. Now remember, Joe Biden is already 80 years old. He will be 86 if he completes a second term as president. Frankly, this is an uncomfortable conversation to have. If you criticize too much, you risk ageism. And what does that mean? Ageism is basically discrimination based on age, like preferring young people for certain jobs or refusing loans or credit cards to older people. It's morally and legally wrong. So the focus should not be on age, really. It should be on mental and physical capacity. Is the person fit for the job or not? Is he or she mentally fit? Joe Biden's recent gaffes certainly weaken his case. But let me also show you the other extreme. Meet Robert Kennedy Jr. He is the nephew of former US President John F. Kennedy. Like his uncle, he's a Democrat. He's also challenging Joe Biden for the presidential nomination. It's a long shot. Last month, this video of his went viral. It's a workout video. Kennedy is seen doing push-ups and bench presses. And yes, he's doing it shirtless. Now, this was supposed to be a campaign stunt. A bid to draw comparisons between him and Biden. Biden, the gaffe machine, and Kennedy, the gym monster. But even this is problematic. You don't need six-pack abs to become president. You also don't have to bench press 100 pounds. All you need is mental acuity. And the US of all countries should know this. One of their most admired presidents is Franklin Roosevelt. He took America out of the Great Depression. He also won them World War II. To top it all, he was president for 12 years, but Roosevelt was actually paralyzed from the waist down. He needed a wheelchair to move around. So world leaders don't have to be built like models. If they want to look like that, that's fine. But it's not a requisite for the job. Despite that, you see them doing all sorts of weird stuff. Vladimir Putin is an expert at this. You may have seen him working out or horse riding without a shirt. It's supposed to be sending macho vibes. Kennedy's gym routine is no different. But all these leaders are underestimating their voters. People don't care if their president goes to the gym. They care about real life issues. Presidents cannot solve inflation by doing 20 push-ups, nor can they create jobs by running a marathon. For that, you need mental virtues like sharpness, patience, ingenuity. So Biden getting names wrong is certainly a cause for worry, but so is fake machismo that hides the lack of policy skills. Have you heard about the AK-47? I'm sure you know this is an assault rifle. It is one of the most popular ones out there. The AK-47 was originally developed by the Soviet Union, but it reached the Afghan Mujahideen during the 1980s. And since then, it has become a symbol of terrorists and terror groups. But now these groups are looking to trade up. They want NATO-grade weapons. And guess who is selling it to them? The Taliban. The rulers of Kabul have now become arms dealers. But how did this happen? You see, the Taliban came to power in the year 2021. It was a sudden power grab. The US military was forced to retreat. It was a hasty withdrawal. They left behind weapons, and a lot of them at that. Now, these weapons are flowing from Afghanistan into the global market. Basically, the Taliban is selling them. And who are the buyers? Anyone who is willing to pay the price. Insurgent groups, terrorists, militias. From the Al-Shabaab in Africa to the TTP in neighboring Pakistan, everyone who can afford to buy these weapons is buying them. And how many weapons are we talking about? The US left behind equipment worth $7.12 billion in Afghanistan. Imagine that. More than $7 billion of defense equipment. And that's not even the full picture. Since the year 2003, the US has given Afghan forces more than 600,000 weapons. 600,000 weapons, 300 aircraft, more than 80,000 vehicles, night vision goggles, biometric systems, basically everything that the US Army used. They gave it to the Afghan forces. And where did all of it go? Well, the Pentagon has no clue, but the world knows. They fell into the Taliban's hands. So basically, it was a failed system. America flooded Afghanistan with billions of dollars of weapons. But they did not care where these weapons went. There is no record of most of this. They don't know what was lost, what was given to the Afghan forces, what the Afghan forces sold to the Taliban, and what was later recovered. So amid all of this confusion, these weapons have showed up again. This time in black markets, from ad hoc bazaars in the desert to makeshift shops on the side of highways. The Taliban is selling these weapons everywhere, and they're making sure they get a premium price. I'll give you an example. A knockoff AK-47 sells for around $130 in these black markets. But an American M4 assault rifle can go for as much as $2,400. Imagine that. An assault rifle being sold for $2,400, and that too in the black market. The market price is anywhere between $800 and $2,000. The night vision goggles are also a popular purchase. They sell for nearly $1,000. Which brings us to the next big question. Where are all of these weapons going? The answer is everywhere. Neighboring Pakistan, Africa, Gaza, Balochistan, and even Kashmir. These weapons are flooding conflict zones. Recently, there were dramatic images of the Tehreek-e-Taliban or TTP attacking the Pakistan police. They had American assault rifles. They were wearing night vision goggles. And this ability to operate at night can be a game changer. Even in Kashmir, these weapons are being used by terror groups, the likes of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Toiba. The valley is flooded with US M4 and M16 assault rifles. Authorities say they're seeing these weapons for the first time. So clearly, this is a worrying development. Now, for the Taliban, this is just like any other business. They've run smuggling networks for decades, selling drugs, gems, and other contraband. So arms trade is just another source of income for them. It doesn't matter who buys it. But for conflict zones, this is a very dangerous development. These weapons give terrorists an edge. And this is a serious setback in the fight against terrorism, all because of American callousness. The US trained the Afghan army for 2 decades. They spent some $83 billion to equip them. The same army could not stop the Taliban. For that matter, even the US army could not stop the Taliban. They left Afghanistan in a mess. And now the rest of the world has to suffer the consequences. And speaking of conspiracies, China has executed a sinister plan. It managed to hack the email of US Commerce Secretary. That's right, the Commerce Minister of the United States of America, a member of Joe Biden's cabinet. She was hacked by America's greatest rival. And this is a serious breach. It goes beyond the Commerce Minister. Accounts of the US State Department were also compromised. Let me first give you a lowdown of what happened and how. Microsoft provides email services to the US government. And the breach happened there. Microsoft systems were compromised. And who was behind the hack? A group called Storm 0558. These are hackers based in China. They gained access to Outlook emails. The breach happened on the 15th of May, and the hackers had access to the emails for a month. That's right. It took a month for the intrusion to be detected and for the access to be blocked. The intrusion was discovered on the 16th of June, just before the US Secretary of State flew off to Beijing. In June, Secretary Blinken made a high-profile visit to China. This was an attempt to resume dialogue with Chinese officials. So when Blinken was heading to China, the Americans knew about this hack, and yet they carried on with the visit. US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo was the most high-profile target of this hack. And why do you think the Commerce Department was targeted? Because the US and China have been locked in a trade war. The Commerce Department is at the forefront of America's attempts to contain China. The Biden administration has limited exports to China, especially of sophisticated US technologies like chips and chip-making equipment. The Commerce Department enforces these restrictions. The orders go through the Commerce Secretary. Besides her, a congressional staffer, a US human rights advocate, and some inboxes belonging to the US State Department were also hacked. An investigation is now underway, but American officials say no classified information was compromised. China was asked about the hack, and their response was classic. Listen to this.
I would like to say that in the past, it was usually the world's #1 hacking group, the US National Security Agency, which also serves as the US Cyber Force Command, that released such kind of disinformation. This time, it was the US National Security Council that made a public statement. Whatever agency spoke, it does not change the fact that the US is the world's biggest hacking empire and global cyber chief.
The US is the world's biggest hacking empire and a global cyber thief. That's what they're saying. China has rubbished the charge. They say America's claims are disinformation. But there's enough proof to show that China has intensified its cyber operations. This is not the first breach. In the month of May, an alert was sounded. Multiple agencies issued warnings. In the US, in Australia, in Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, they detected a Chinese hacking operation. A group called Volt Typhoon was behind it, and reports say this was a state-sponsored Chinese campaign. What were these attackers after? Critical infrastructure like communications, electric and gas utilities, and transportation. So the targets are wide-ranging, and the hacks are getting more sophisticated. What does that tell you? China's cyber capabilities are improving. Chinese hackers are focusing on stealth operations where they can linger around emails and servers for months without being detected. It doesn't look good for the US. From spy balloons to cyber hacks, they've seen it all in this year. But the engagements with China continue, at least for now. In fact, they had a high-level meeting today, a meeting of their top diplomats, Antony Blinken and Wang Yi. They're in Jakarta for the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Summit. And what's the purpose of this meeting? Well, the Americans are looking for a détente. And this is a clear shift in approach. In February, remember, when a Chinese spy balloon was caught hovering over US skies, Washington launched missiles to shoot it down. It called off Blinken's planned visit to Beijing. A few weeks later, Blinken attacked China publicly. He accused Beijing of sending military aid to Russia and supporting the Kremlin's war in Ukraine. But now, the US has dialed down the verbal attacks. Instead of combating China and decoupling, they're talking about, quote-unquote, managing differences. From the looks of it, neither plan has worked. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with North Korea, the country's media has released the footage of its latest ballistic missile launch. Meanwhile, a brawl broke out in Kosovo's parliament. Lawmakers threw fists at each other after Kosovo's prime minister was sprayed with water during his address. While some politicians were fighting in Kosovo, others were offering each other coffee in Lithuania. Dutch Prime Minister Rutte asked the Ukrainian President Zelensky where he got his cup of coffee from. Zelensky offered his coffee to the Dutch leader, but he refused, saying, "You're fighting a war, this is your coffee." The two then decided to share the beverage. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1930, the first ever FIFA World Cup began in the South American nation of Uruguay. FIFA selected this country because its national football team won the Olympic football tournament against Argentina in 1928. It was the last football tournament organized as a part of the Summer Olympics. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Nuk ka votim. Qetësi, ju lutem. Është bërë e ne nuk e kemi kundërshtuar edhe denoncuar. Nalu bre, nalu. Ju lutem, policia brenda kuvendit. How did you get that coffee? You want tea? Tea fine. No, you are fighting a war. This is your coffee. No, you have to stay home.
Okay, I will share you. 50% I will together. We'll share it.